It's been called the most dangerous flight in history, Flight 232. But this title can also be attributed to the near disaster that befell British Airways Flight 9 on June 1982. A Boeing 747-200 was on a routine flight from London to Auckland, New Zealand, with 257 people on board. It was a long flight, and by the time the plane reached its final destination, the crew had been awake for 16 hours. They were exhausted but excited to finally finish their shift. As the plane approached the runway, the pilots could see out of the windows ash clouds that covered the entire sky. The pilots decided to divert to another airport. However, when they got there, they were greeted by even more ash clouds. Now the pilots were in trouble. They didn't have enough fuel for another fly-around. This meant that one of them would have to land the plane in the middle of an ash cloud. The decision they made next saved the lives of everyone on board. As they approached the airport, they kept a lookout for a break in the ash cloud. They hoped to catch a break and get through the worst of it. But as they got closer to the runway, they saw that the ash was getting thicker and thicker. There was no break in sight. They knew that if they continued any further, they would be met with almost certain disaster. But they were already committed. They had to land the plane, even if it meant flying into an ash cloud. So they made a risky decision. The pilots decided to go around one last time. If this attempt failed, they would not have enough fuel to try again. And so the fate of everyone on board hung in the balance. Would they make it through the ash cloud, or would it spell disaster? Let's find out. This is the story of British Airways Flight 9. The year is 1982, and Mount Galunggung in Indonesia has just erupted. Ash is being blown across the Tasman Sea towards New Zealand. It's so much ash that air traffic control at Auckland Airport closes the airport down. Flights are grounded until the ash cloud passes. But two planes are on their way, and they're in serious trouble. One is a DC-10, the other a 747. Both of these flights are very long-haul flights, and both of them need to land soon. If they don't, their engines will run out of fuel, and that would spell disaster. Air New Zealand Flight 147 is the first to reach the airport. The pilots decide to land despite the ash cloud. They make one pass over the runway. But once they're in the cloud, visibility drops to 0. They can barely see anything. The pilots abort the landing and head back up into the sky. They have to wait for the cloud to clear. The pilots make a second pass at the runway, but the same thing happens. The cloud is too thick and they abort once again. By now, the crew of Flight 147 is starting to panic. The longer they stay in the air, the more fuel they use. Soon they'll have to turn back and head to Australia. But before they can, the plane starts to shake violently. The pilots fight to keep the plane under control. Suddenly, the No. 3 engine fails. They've lost an engine in the middle of an ash cloud. To make things worse, the weather outside is bad. Storms are rolling in and winds are picking up. This makes the situation even more dangerous. The pilots struggle to keep the plane in the air. They try to restart the engine, but it's no use. The damage has been done, and the engine cannot be fixed. The pilots radio for help. Air traffic control tells them to divert to another airport. But by now, all the airports in the area are closed due to the ash cloud. The pilots know that they're in big trouble. They're running out of fuel, and they don't have anywhere to go. But they manage to pull off a miracle landing. They set the plane down on a highway. It's not exactly what you would call a perfect landing, but it's good enough to save the plane and everyone on board. But there are still problems. The ash cloud is still in the sky. The pilots of British Airways Flight 9 are watching the events unfold with bated breath. They redue to land in less than an hour, and they have no idea what's going to happen. The pilots of Flight 147 managed to land their plane on a highway. What if they weren't so lucky? Would they be able to land in the middle of an ash cloud? As they watch, they see the ash cloud start to clear. They line up with the runway and start their descent. But then, suddenly the engine warning lights start flashing. The plane is losing altitude fast. The pilots fight to keep the plane in the air. They pull back power on the engines, but it's too late. The plane is now in a dive. They pull up on the control column, but it's too late. The plane is going to crash. The pilots know that there's nothing they can do to save the plane. They've lost control of the aircraft. All they can do now is hope for the best. The plane crashes into the ground and explodes. Everyone on board is killed. Now, Let's rewind a bit. When the pilots of British Airways Flight 9 realized that they were in trouble, they did something that saved the lives of everyone on board. They decided to go around. They put the plane into a steep climb and headed away from the runway. They knew that they couldn't land in the middle of an ash cloud. They needed to get out of there as fast as possible. They climbed to 37,000 feet, which was the highest that they could go. They then set the autopilot for 39,000 feet. They wanted to get as high as possible. But then something happened that none of them expected. The plane started to shake. The pilots fought to keep the plane under control, but it was no use. The ash cloud was too strong and the plane was being tossed around like a toy. They were getting too close to the speed of sound. Their plane was about to hit the sound barrier. They've lost an engine in the middle of an ash cloud. To make matters worse, the ash cloud was too thick. They couldn't even see the ground below them. They were flying blind. They had to make a decision. Should they try to land, or should they try to get another engine working? They decided to try to fix the engine. They weren't sure if they could land safely without an engine. They worked for hours trying to fix the engine, but it was no use. The damage was too severe, and the engine could not be fixed. The pilots knew that they were in big trouble. They were low on fuel, and they didn't have anywhere to go. Ash cloud was still in the sky, and the airports were still closed. We're trapped in the middle of an ash cloud with a broken plane and dwindling fuel supplies. The pilots knew that they were in a race against time. They needed to land the plane before they ran out of fuel. But where could they land? The answer came when one of the pilots spotted a small break in the ash cloud. It was just a small opening, but it was enough for them to try to land. The plane was shaking violently, but the pilots managed to keep it under control. They touched down on the runway, and the plane veered off to the side. The pilots knew that they had made it. They had survived the ash cloud. How did the pilots survive? The pilots of British Airways Flight 9 survived because they took quick action when they realized that they were in trouble. They put the plane into a steep climb and headed away from the runway. This gave them time to work on fixing the engine. They also did a great job of staying calm under pressure. The pilots knew that they were in a race against time. They needed to land the plane before they ran out of fuel, but they didn't panic. Stayed calm and worked together as a team to solve the problem. But what about the passengers? The passengers on board Flight 9 also played a role in the survival of the plane. After the first engine failed, the passengers helped to evacuate the plane. This allowed the passengers to escape the plane before it exploded. The passengers also did a great job of staying calm during the evacuation. Even though the plane had just crashed, the passengers didn't panic. They followed the flight attendant's instructions and evacuated the plane in an orderly fashion. This helped to save many lives. Thanks for watching. Do you know any other stories of pilots who have escaped disaster? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching.